In this video, I'm going to show a CSS trick that we can use to make a sticky top nav and then have content scroll underneath that nav, while at the same time making sure that the content starts underneath the nav initially. Several different things that we have to do that require a little bit of CSS magic, but it can give a really nice look and feel, especially compared to what we used to try to do back in the late 90s. This was a common website of the late 90s, and this is kind of a satirical website. But a lot of times we would use frame sets to try to make navigation sticky. The only trick is that it did not resize well. It did not anticipate the evolution of smartphones that were going to have a much smaller display. So if you have a small display, the wrong things get the space. On the other hand, if we use cascading style sheets, there are a lot of neat things that we can do, like create a different style with the same content if we're going to print things out versus if we're going to see them on screen. Let's get started, and I'm going to use the About Us page that we have been editing so far in some previous videos. As a matter of fact, I'm going to add a little bit more text here, just some Latin text, because I want this to be scrollable. It looks like I might need to indent a little bit to make it look nicer. And now we see we have a bit more content. So now let's make a fixed top navigation. One thing going in our favor. If you take a look at the page that we have so far, you notice we have our body tag, which is where all of the visible content goes. And then all of the content we have so far is within a master div. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and give this an ID. An ID is an attribute in HTML. The only rule with IDs is that the value, that is the thing that's in quotes here, can only be used once on a page. So we'll call this one content, just so we know this is what the user's looking at. Let's make our top nav, but very important, we want to make our top nav in a separate div. And the reason is, divs can be styled individually, especially when we use this ID attribute, so that we can call them out and identify them individually. So we'll say div ID equals top nav. And at the moment, we're going to keep this div very simple. I'm simply going to say home, plants, and maybe about us, something like that. Something very straightforward. If I refresh the page, you can see this dummy nav across the top. But the problem is when I scroll, it goes away. And that's what we want to change with some CSS. In a previous video, we created a linked style sheet here that's linked into our About Us page. So we've already set that up, which means that everything else we need to do, we can do in this linked styles CSS. That's nice because it keeps the style separate from our data, separate from our content. And as we'll see in a future video, it also allows us to specify different style sheets for different ways that the user interacts with us. Let's start by making a style that's specific to this top nav. Remember, the ID attribute is equal to top nav. So if we want to make a selector on a specific ID, we use the hash symbol, and then we use the value that is associated with that ID attribute, which in our case is top nav. Open curly, close curly, and now we can start putting some attributes in here, some values and attributes. Let's start by just identifying the background color. And for that, we'll say pound F2C879, which again, that's a value we can get from our color wheel. Terminate with the semicolon save. Return to our page. And if you look closely, it might not show up too well on the video, but that's a slightly different background color than the background color of the whole page. It's just a little bit darker. Let's make it a bit more distinct with the border. So all of these stylable boxes like div, we can put a border on, but by default they don't start with a border. If we specify a border with a pattern, we'll get that border. Let's refresh, and now you see that this specific div has a dotted border, just as we specified here in our CSS. Let's do a few things now to align this top nav. Because you'll notice it doesn't go all the way to the top, it doesn't go all the way to the left, it doesn't go all the way to the right, but we want it to look more like it's just kind of a banner that's hanging across our entire site. Vertical align, top, margin, top, 0px. Think about our box model. Remember that the margin is what goes outside of that border and gives us space between our elements. Left, 0, start right at the absolute left pixel. Top, 0, again, start right at that absolute top pixel. Position, fixed. This is an interesting one because it means if the rest of the page scrolls, this element is going to stay fixed. Let's refresh our page and look at the changes. So you see right now everything is locked at that 0, 0 position, and it gives us a little bit more space. Now a couple things that we'll notice here is that the scroll is working for us so far. But we still have a few things that we want to change. First of all, let's do width 100%, which is going to take that navigation all the way across the screen. Let's also give it a height. Now width makes sense as 100% because we always want it to go across the street. For height, I'm going to use a relative measurement, 3em, and that's just going to kind of give it a constant height. Refresh our page. Okay, it looks good because it's going all the way across the screen, but you notice something. The content is now hiding under this a little bit. We used to have an H1 under here, and the content is essentially under this nav, and we'll never see it because we can't scroll up to the point we're going to see that content. Why is that? Well, when we told this to be position fixed, we said that it will always be located at this point in the screen. The trick is in doing that, we also said that we don't need to think about this when we render the rest of the page. It's fixed right here. Go ahead and render the rest of the page as though this does not exist. The problem is our content then also starts rendering up here at 0, 0, and it starts painting underneath this nav. So we need to give the content a bit of space to be visible as well. Remember that we made an identifier for our content, so we can make a selector that's specific for our content. First, we'll say position relative, which means it's relative to other items on the page, and then margin top 3em. Remember what margin top is. Margin top means what margin do we have above the border. By default, we're not giving it anything, but by having it as 3em, notice what else is 3em? The same height of this top nav. So what we're doing is we're saying, don't start painting this until you count down by 3em. And that essentially means there's going to be nothing in the first 3em, which is the space where this top nav will be. Let's take a look now. Well, things are lining up a bit better, but notice something else that's a bit goofy, and it's a little easier to see if I shrink this. Notice when I scroll, the content is kind of overlapping with the top nav. So yeah, we can see where the top nav is, but it gives us a not opaque look and feel. One more thing that we need to specify in that case, a z-index. Easiest way to think about a z-index. Think that you're looking from a helicopter or an airplane and you're looking down. Z-index is like a floor. So if I have floor 100, that means it's going to obscure floors 0 through 99, but not floor 101, 102, so on and so forth. As long as I have a CSS style, if the z-index is higher than any other z-index on the page where they might overlap, then the highest z-index number is going to win. In other words, let's refresh the page and look again. We still have the content starting where the content should start, but now look what happens when we scroll. This up top has a z-index of 100, which means it's the first thing we see if we're looking down from above. The content we did not specify a z-index, so it's just going to assume a z-index of something less than 100, maybe 0 or 1. The behavior that we get is this. We can scroll, and all of this content hides underneath our nav, and our top nav is sticky. So in this video, we've seen how to use CSS to create a navigation bar that is sticky and then allows the content to scroll underneath it. As always, I hope this video was helpful, and I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.